Before taking up his current role, he was the UK Operations Manager for E.ON's Energy Trading Division. His involvement in climate change originates when he was seconded to the UK government in 2005 during the G8 presidency, when climate change really became a pivotal concern. On return to E.ON, he was appointed as head of climate change, reporting initially to the chief executive, where he led the company's low carbon program. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Pyke.
Right, which one are we on? Okay, I thought that was a fantastic presentation. In fact, I must commend all the presentations I've heard this morning. Okay, what I want to take you on is just a short journey. First of all, I got involved in climate change, as I said, back in sort of 2005-06, and I had the opportunity to talk to a number of the people within the government about this whole climate dilemma. A number of things struck you. The first thing that strikes you is when you look at our blue planet from space is just how incredibly thin the atmosphere is above our heads. And, you know, yes, since the Industrial Revolution, we've been putting carbon dioxide up there, and for people that sort of don't think we're changing the climate, well, then it's a sort of a think again issue. The other issue that hits you is that there's only one planet, and it's an incredibly difficult challenge for politicians to really get to grip with the whole of the climate space, because people perceive it as being tomorrow's problem. There isn't things around you that really focuses the mind, and that's why people that really are serious about it are so important. Okay, why don't people basically take it seriously? Well, I guess I've given up the amount of people or the amount of media articles you read recently, but we've just had one of the coldest winters in a generation. Surely this whole climate change has just disappeared. Picture from the Met Office showing you in terms of the average temperatures that we've seen. So you can look at, in dark blue is where we have been essentially against the average compared to the last sort of 30 years or so. So we might have had a cold winter, but other parts of the world have clearly had a much hotter winter. So the planet is clearly still warming. But again, if you read the newspapers, read the media, what do you see? It's very, very difficult to get that whole focus and get people behind this agenda. Similarly, I mean, the media advertising, I guess, made a bit of a field day, really, of Ed Miliband's advert. He said, rubber-dubber-dub, 3 men in a tub, a necessary course of action to flash flooding caused by climate change. And yet we're in this bizarre situation whereby the government trying to get public opinion in terms of motivating people, suddenly the Advertising Standards Authority rejected it. Again, what people actually see around them, what you read in the media, really actually conditions people's mindset, okay, and that's so important. Right, the talk of my session is the energy trilemma. And what E.ON's really been talking about in this space is just having a conversation. And the conversation is, how do you tackle climate change? How do you tackle it in a way which keeps the lights on, the security of supply agenda? And how do you do it at an affordable cost? Okay? Because you'll see business, if you want to retain a competitive industry, they want affordability. That's the #1 agenda that they lead on, okay, is in cost terms. So you're trying to find an answer to that triangle. And I thought there was an excellent presentation this morning from our chairman who summarized the different competing issues, the pros and cons of lots of the different technology, lots of the options. So yes, they have their positives, but they also have their downsides. So the common real theme that we're looking at is diversity. If no one thing solves the problem, you've got to make sure that you're looking at all of the technology options, including the land use issue as well. I can't help commenting as well is that I think the issue about sort of becoming vegetarian was the point that Lord Stern got picked up in the media when some of the previous speakers actually issues came up. The media just made a field day, and it's almost like one sort of small comment then gets taken out basically out of context. Okay, right, let's think about the whole climate change agenda, and I'll sort of comment some of the themes that you've seen. Just think of your own footprint. And there's probably some people with some very low carbon footprints in this room, actually. So if you think about the issues that we're looking sort of at the wider agenda, there's 3 areas, really. We've got to decarbonise electricity, we've got to decarbonise how we heat our homes, and we've got to think about the transport sector. Just to think on the top one, the issues about wind, well, again, yeah, we've heard wind is an incredibly low carbon source of generation, but we have to make sure we've managed its issues around intermittency. Nuclear power station, people are now beginning to look at that in the UK, and people have got plans to take that serious again. And on the right, at the top right, you're seeing the issues around carbon capture and storage, and I'll touch on some of our thinking around that behind Kingsnorth. The heating sector, how do we heat our homes? And I guess here it's quite ironic, really, that because we have such a mild climate, we have some of the sort of the lousiest sort of building stock in this country, because we haven't really had severe cold winters. And as such, the levels of insulation we have in our properties are nowhere near up to scratch. The issues about how you heat your homes, how many gas-fired central heating boilers do people have? So each individual home might not have a big carbon footprint, but invisibly, you know, you've got carbon dioxide going up the side of your house, up into the atmosphere. You have that on tens of millions of properties. You have to think about, well, we have to basically move to things like ground source and air source heat pumps with our homes. But that's about people taking individual decisions around their homes about what they do. Then you go on the transport sector. Well, when are we all going to be driving electric cars? Yep. We're doing trials at the moment around Birmingham and Coventry about cables, so driving electric cars. How long's their battery life? If you live in rural communities, is that going to be useful in terms of the journeys that you take? Completing the electrification of the rail network. How many of our trains basically still operating in terms of running on diesel? So the electrification of all of the main lines. And the aviation question. That Boeing 747 first flew in 1970. That's a 40-year-old design, the jumbo jet. It's quite incredible, really, when you're thinking about it. It'll probably have more efficient engines. It'll probably be carrying less weight in terms of modern metals, but you've still got a 40-year-old aircraft. It's got some of the issues that we have within the power sector. It's incredibly long-lived assets here that we're having to deal with. Okay, right, some targets, and this is, I'm quite interested in the decarbonisation pathway. The UK is leading part of this space because what the UK has done is said, okay, we've got to get to an 80% reduction in our greenhouse gases by 2050. So we've got 40 years to get there. And one of the most important things that the UK government did was set up Lord Turner's Committee on Climate Change, because what they've done there is actually put together a group of people that have really taken a serious look at the problem and said, how do you get to 2050, how do you decarbonise our economy? And the picture that they've shown is essentially saying, in red is looking at where electricity has to come from. Because if we're all going to be driving electric cars, that electricity has to come from somewhere. If we're going to switch to the way we heat our homes through ground source or air source heat pumps, they still use electricity as an input. So you can start to see that they have got a projection that we need to become far more energy efficient with our usage, perhaps from 2010 to around about 2025. And then you can see the pickup in electricity demand as we make the change. So we switch out of petrol and diesel and switch into electricity as a mode of transport or provision of energy. And in the blue line, it's about tackling the carbon footprint of the UK's generation business, because the blue line starts at around about 550 grams. That's essentially saying it's a combination of the nuclear power stations, the gas and the coal that we have in this country. And you can see by 2030, you've got to go from 550 grams per kilowatt hour down to less than 100. So that's the sort of target that you're talking about. And it's an enormous investment decision, because you've got to replace a huge amount of the capital stock that we've got within this country. You've also got to actually encourage an enormous amount of the population to want to do things with their homes, want to basically fit solar panels on their homes, want to put ground source heat pumps in. Okay? So you've got individuals wanting to take it and communities to actually take decisions. So there's where we are. Okay, this E.On thinking around this issue is just look at the starting point. The starting point on the far left is showing you the state of the infrastructure. And it's basically showing it, the blue line going across is where the demand was back in 2007. The right-hand picture is showing you where the blue line now sits because of the impact of the recession that we've had in this country. Demand for electricity has dropped substantially because of the impact. Manufacturing's taken an enormous hit. And so you can start to see we're now looking at serving lower levels of demand out I guess, for the next 10 years or so. What you are seeing, though, is the asset base still has to be replaced. The map that you saw right at the beginning from the presentation talked about the oil-fired power station. Well, there it is closing out. A lot of the nuclear plants will come out. And the coal plant, that most of it's 40 years old in this country, which to some extent is a bit of an engineering marvel that it's lasted so long, has to be replaced. You can now see the recession starting to hit, and you're seeing a fair bit of gas-fired power stations